Hello, welcome to Mr. Paul's Pantry. I'm Mr. Paul and it's nice to see you all here, especially new visitors. If you're the first time, very warm welcome. But also to all my returning visitors, nice to see you again after such a long time. Now, today's recipe is something that's been requested many times, and for various reasons. The main one being is I know nothing about school dinners because I never had school dinners. It is an old school dinner recipe. Anyway, it's been requested too many times for me to ignore it any longer. If you remember last year, I did a school dinner recipe for cheese flan. It was for cheese flan, that's correct. And during my research, because I didn't know anything about these school dinner recipes, I found 3 families whose mothers had been school dinner cooks in the kitchens. And one of the families, very fortunately, still had their mother's exercise book with all her recipes and menus in. And they let me have a copy. So that's where I got my cheese flan recipe from. But this one was requested many times, hundreds of times in actual fact, as a sprinkle cake. And I looked through this book and couldn't find anything, but there was something called a rainbow cake, which turns out to be the same thing. In those days it was called a rainbow sponge. Sprinkles is something I'd never heard of in 50 odd years of baking until the advent of these modern cupcakes with lots of buttercream on top, and the word sprinkles arrived, but I'd never heard of it. When we use these things in the shop for children's birthday cakes, etc., they were always known as hundreds and thousands. Even when we ordered them from the suppliers, that was on the order list, hundreds and thousands, nothing else, just little coloured bits of sugar. So I'm going to make this cake, and the recipe, it's a very old one, of course, from the 1950s and 60s, and it contains margarine. Now, in those days, margarine was a hard, solid lump of hydrogenated vegetable oil and tasted pretty awful. But of course, just after the war, things were difficult or expensive, so it had to be used. That's why recipes in those days nearly always had some additive like a vanilla essence or almond essence or something like that to hide the unusual taste of the margarine. Well, in the bakery, we always used butter. So I obviously decided I was going to change this recipe and use butter and not margarine. But watching television one day, I heard Mary Berry say, "I've discovered," and don't forget she's older than me actually, nice lady, been baking all her life, longer than I have. And she said, "I've discovered very late in life that this stuff," and she held up a tub of soft margarine, "works in sponges much better than butter. And of course, modern margarines have a nice flavour." So I thought, is she mad or what? Using margarine instead of butter. So I tried it and I was amazed. So what I've done with this recipe is I'm still keeping margarine in the recipe as it was originally, but I've just adapted the amount slightly to allow for this soft margarine. So this is available anywhere. The hard block margarine, like the Echo or the Stork, you can still buy in some places, but not very many. I can't buy it here. Lots of people can't buy it. They've told me before that when I've told them about margarine, they said they can't buy it. So although it is still made, I do know that. But this is available anywhere, soft margarine. It's easy to use, it's got a nice flavour, and there's plenty of brands to choose from. And they're healthy these days, by the way. So I'm going to make this recipe to the exact recipe that it was made in the 1950s and 60s, just with the change from hard margarine to soft margarine. So first of all, with the ingredients. So here are the ingredients for this sponge that we're going to make. First of all, we've got self-raising flour. If you haven't got self-raising flour, there is a link underneath the video showing you how to make your own from plain flour and some baking powder. I'm using 200 grams of self-raising flour, 200 grams of white sugar, granulated or caster, it doesn't make any difference. I've got some margarine here. Now, originally this recipe was from an old school dinner cook's book, and it was using margarine, but in those days they used very hard block margarines such as Stork and Echo and things like that, which is not always available today. You can buy it in some places. Most things you can buy is the soft margarine in tubs like this. And I've just adjusted the recipe so that you can use this. And the reason I'm using the margarine today is it gives much better results than ever we had in the bakery using butter. Then the margarine had terrible flavours in it. Today they've perfected that. This is wonderful. This is soft tub margarine and it's perfect, just at room temperature. I've got 4 large eggs and 2 teaspoonfuls of extra baking powder. That's if you're using self-raising flour. If you're using plain flour, you will need to put some extra baking powder in. See the link underneath, okay? So we've got self-raising flour, white sugar, soft tub margarine, baking powder and eggs, and that's it. If you have difficulty measuring or weighing grams, small amounts like teaspoons, such as this, I suggest you buy yourself a set of these. I think they're wonderful. It's a teaspoon there. What you can do is you get the teaspoon and you just level it off and you've got the same measurement every single time. Okay? So if I put teaspoons, best use one of those, because out of your cutlery drawer I've got about 24 teaspoons in my cutlery drawer, and amongst them there are 5 different sizes, so I shouldn't risk using those. Okay, so those are the ingredients. Let's do it. Right, before we start mixing any ingredients together, there's 2 things we have to do. We have to first of all put the oven on. That needs to go on at 180, okay, 180 centigrade. If you've got a fan you might have to just adjust that, but it depends on your oven, okay. But get that oven now, because that needs to be on when we mix this ingredients together. It needs to go in the oven right away. The second thing we have to do is to prepare our baking tin. Now I'm using it's a roasting tin I'm using. I'm not quite sure of the size of it, but it's about, yes, it's 30 by 22. If you want it in inches, it's 12 inches by 9 inches, okay? And then we need to grease that, and we need to put some paper in like this, so that it overhangs at both sides, like this. Sorry about that. Overhangs at both sides like that. So when we've finished, we can lift the whole thing out, just make sure it doesn't stick. Now we come to mixing the ingredients. I'm going to put everything in here together. I'm putting in the flour, I'm putting in the baking powder, I'm putting in the sugar, and I'm just going to give that a little mix round, just to distribute the baking powder, that's all. And also in there we're going to put the butter, which is not butter, sorry, it's margarine, and we're going to put in the eggs. That's absolutely everything that we've got there into the bowl. I'm going to take my electric mixer . Now once we've started incorporating the ingredients like that, I want to just go round with a spatula to make sure there's no dry ingredients sticking to the side of the bowl. And that should do it. We don't want to overmix the thing. Get rid of those. And that should just be falling off the spatula like that. That's how it should be. If it's not doing that, your eggs haven't been big enough or something like that. If you do have a problem with it and it's not falling off, put a couple of teaspoonfuls of milk in it, that's all. But that's what it needs to be like. It needs to fall off that spatula just quite like that. Next, we need the tin that we prepared earlier, and we're going to put that straight into there. One thing I love about these silicone spatulas is you can actually get every scrap out of the mixing bowl, which was always a bind, you know, having to sort of leave things in the bowl. Now just level it off there to the edges. Now if you want to make this a deeper sponge when it's cooked, all you have to do is use a smaller tin, okay? Don't start asking me how to adjust the recipe, because on my website, if you look at the recipe, there will always be the number of servings, and at the side of it there'll be a little plus and a minus sign. And if you say it serves 4 people on that recipe, if you change that to 8, automatically the ingredients below will double, give you the correct amounts to put in for 8 servings instead of 4. So all my recipes are like that. So if you only want to make a little portion for 2, change that number to 2 and the ingredients will all change automatically. There we are. That's going to go in the oven now for about 35-40 minutes. And I'll show you when it's finished. Right, here we are with the finished sponge. It's nice and moist, nice soft sponge as you can see. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put a thin layer of icing on there. Okay, so we'll do that next. To do that, you're going to need 200 grams of icing sugar. And into the 200 grams of icing sugar, we're going to add 2 tablespoons of either lemon juice or boiled water. When I say boiled water, I don't mean boiling water, just water that's been boiled and sterilised, that's all. That goes into here. And we're going to mix that now, and we should finish up with just the right consistency if you use 1 tablespoonful per 100 grams of icing sugar. Okay, well I've got 200 grams here, so we're going to, if it's a little stiff when we finish doing this, then we'll add a little more. But I don't think we're going to do that. We don't want it too runny and we don't want it too stiff, but we just want to make sure that we've got all the lumps out of it, that's all. I think that's about right. Get the sponge back. We need to put the icing on the sponge. Just going to gently move that around to the edges. You don't need to be too fussy about this because we're actually going to cover up the icing with some sprinkles. Now this is a sponge that I've told you before earlier in the video that I've made many hundreds and hundreds of times over the years in my bakery. It was only when I saw the recipe for this sprinkle cake that I recognised the recipe. I'd never known it as a school dinner, of course. And this now is just right. We don't need to do anything else to it. Now you can either put the sprinkles on now or leave it to dry a little if you want. I'm going to just put some on straight away. Like that. You can put as many or as few as you want on, it doesn't matter. They're cheap as chips and they look very nice indeed. And I think you will agree that that does look quite attractive. We're going to let the icing dry, and when that's dried I'll come back, I'll cut it into portions and make some custard and we'll give it a try. So here we are with a nice portion of the sponge there, beautiful and moist, and of course it wouldn't be the same without a nice portion of custard. It is very nice, very delicious. So there we are. This is Mr. Paul saying bye for now. I'll see you next time. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, go down underneath, give it a thumbs up, and if you have any questions or queries or comments, leave them underneath also. I do answer them all if I can. I do certainly read them all. I don't always have time to answer everyone individually, but I do try to answer as many as I can. So it's Mr. Paul saying bye for now, and I'll see you next time.